That's disgusting.
In a pot that's somewhat as pussy. This is beard on microphone. Ow. Ow. It's pulling at my beard.
Get your beard juices all over my microphone.
There is no sentence I want to hear less. Is that my sweat or is that a special beard secretion? Hello and welcome to Add It to the List, the show where we binge watch a season of an anime and then talk about whether we think it should go on your watch list. My name is Jack, and with me, as always, is Forrest.
Hello there.
And today, beware spoilers for this week's anime, Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Along the way, in this case, I didn't mention it last week because there really wasn't much, but for this week, trigger warnings for just obscene amounts of violence. Like, oh my jeez Louise, oh gosh, so much violence, and it is diverse, and it is occasionally ceaseless. Very bloody show, very dismemberment heavy show. But Forrest, what was your knowledge of the show going into it?
Pretty much zero. I had seen fan art of the characters online, and that was about it. I have not played the Cyberpunk video game. I honestly, like, the extent of my knowledge of just the cyberpunk genre is like Blade Runner, and that's about it. So, yes, I basically went into this 100% blind. What about you?
I am not old enough to have played the original Cyberpunk, like, tabletop setting, but I was the briefcase kid in high school, which means I was a hipster. So, when people were getting into D&D, a couple of people were also like, oh, hey, this Shadowrun thing's pretty cool. And me, with my deep 4chan knowledge, was like, oh, about Cyberpunk 2020. Right? I was that kid. And so I've read, like, the source books. It's been a while, but I read, like the old stuff. So I knew a little bit about the setting going into it, and honestly, I was super excited, or going into the game, I should say, going into 2077. And I was super excited for 2077 because of, like, that first 2013 trailer was just so weird, and, like, it looked like it'd be, like, really good and different and, like, tragic. And then I've dropped, like, 400 hours into the game. So I'm familiar with Night City, or at least how it is depicted in the video game.
But I'm assuming the game was neither good nor tragic.
The game
Or maybe it was tragically good.
The game is incredibly fun. It is incredibly not fleshed out. Like, you can tell where the dev crunch, you can tell where the dev crunch happened at each and every story point. Like, you can tell where, like, some factions just didn't get a chance to be flushed out. Mox, I'm looking at you. I love you. I love all of you. Those things. And then, yeah, it's just a fun action game. There's some cool combat mechanics because it like, the setting enables, like, quick hacking, which is just, like, a super cool concept. That sort of gets the game to extend beyond just guns and swords, although I do love how you can go swords in a universe where you can have a, like, pistol that shoots through 7 walls and explodes on contact with whatever. Like, we're in that universe, and I can get you with a sword. That's fun for me. Obviously, my first build was Gorilla Fists for big punch. Yeah. But the show, I had actually ended up watching the cold open for the anime, not knowing what it was. Because in the game, once the anime dropped, they added a brain dance that you can find and, like, initiate, like, a side quest for. That is the cold open. Like, not, like, recreated in engine, but, like, it's it's the video clip, like all the way up to the thing. Yeah, very good. Yeah, the cold open. So we are still new enough that we should probably go, especially because we keep messing around with the format. We should probably mention that we're going to go spoiler light, but that does not mean spoiler non-present for the first half. We'll see how much we actually have to say. The first section, and then there will be a very clear breaking point where we discuss whether or not we think we'll give a hard yes or no about whether or not it's list worthy. And then after that point, it's spoiler season. But the cold open is like a pretty solid establishing shot of like mega skyscrapers. We get a holographic koi fish, and then there's just this big dude with these big like armor plated eyes, and you can like see metal everywhere. He's shirtless for some reason, and like he's wearing like cargo pants, and he just walks up to this police scene and just starts going in on a squad of Night City police officers. We get to watch a cyber psycho attack, and that's where we start. It's very bloody, very fun, but very bloody all the way down.
It's almost as if the concept of a cyber psycho is very relevant to this story.
You know, it's not nothing as far as the story's concerned. By this point, I think like between Blade Runner and honestly Cyberpunk 2077 sort of getting back into like the cultural zeitgeist, we don't need to like spend time talking about like the themes of like the setting. But yeah, cyber psychos and violence, very cyberpunk, both the setting and the genre.
I mean, I think it is important to talk about the just the general tone of this anime, because I think that's like its strongest point. Like it's very, very atmospheric and just like really gets. I mean, that was probably the most intriguing part of the whole show for me. Was just the tone and like the world, you know.
Yeah, the show does a very good job of establishing the setting, and it does. Episode 1 especially goes really hard in establishing that desperate lack of humanitarian values tone. Like, life sucks, not in like a way that's even, you know, it's a hashtag relatable clown honk for like modern life, but life is really garbage for the majority of people in this setting and in these genres. And the first episode really lays it on heavy in a way that's really good. Like, you don't know who these characters are, and to a certain extent, you kind of never learn, up to and including the main character, David Martinez. He's just in a bad way. Very minor spoilers. Again, episode 1. We watch David get, like, pretty hardcore bullied. We watch his mom struggling financially. We see he's about to get kicked out of school. There's some physical bullying that goes on. And then his mom dies. And so it's like, oh God, what do I do? And it's like, well, I don't know, kid, but here's the bill for, you know, cremation. Go figure out how to pay that.
Yeah, it's a very dark start, but I had literally no idea where this story was going, and there's definitely like a fair amount of twists and turns, and that first episode was the big twist, and I mean a very big twist in my opinion, because I guess maybe not for people who already know the like general atmosphere of the Cyberpunk game, you know. It's just like I was not expecting it to just immediately go hard like that.
Yeah, like we go. So in Cyberpunk, there is in Cyberpunk the setting, there is a concept called a brain dance, and it's basically like a virtual reality experience where you're like tuned into like the emotional frequencies and like the like artificially created sensations of the entire thing. Like it's 5D. In that first Cyber Psycho, like cold open is an XBD that main character David is watching, and so we just watch someone die, and then the next thing we watch is titties. Right? Like, it's a very aggressive cut from violence to desperation to sex, back to desperation, back to sex, back to violence, back to just like, I think how I put episode 1 is it does a good job of setting up people just living and puking and jerking it in public. It really does set up the tone well. And it is one of desperation, because that's what life is in 2077, at least for most of us.
I don't know if I want to live in 2077 if it's like that.
Statistically speaking, I will. Not for very long into 77, but sometime in the 70s. Oh God, I made myself sad.
Yeah, I mean, David's character is genuinely just like a tragic character. I feel like this story is honestly more of a tragedy than I was expecting. But once again, like, I was 100% blind. And as you were saying, like, just the cyberpunk world is a pretty tragic world to begin with. As you like expressed that like that was the thing about the original Cyberpunk 2077 trailer that like really hooked you.
Yeah, very upsetting setting. Yeah, episode 1. So we're not going to go episode by episode, but in episode 1 we pretty much learn that David's mom, who worked as like a sort of like a body dispatcher ER person, had stolen the military-grade implant from the Cyber Psycho from the cold open. And so when she dies, and David's having a hard time with things, his options are either try to get money to keep his ass in school. The pepper is making me burpy. Either try to get money to keep his ass in school, or hardcore go into something else. And so after like a long string of just things going from bad to worse to actively impossible, he ends the episode going to his Ripper Doc friend, sort of like a street clinic body modification sort of guy, except body mod in the way of like, I want new artificial lungs, not I want you to put a gauge in my ear, but type of body mod. And he's like, hey, I know that you were being an asshole and not selling or and not trying to buy this at a reasonable price. Put it on me. And David's like, it's time I get chromed. So David gets a military grade like neural network reflex wiring time slowing implant.
Which, I mean, honestly, that's just the wildest piece of technology in this entire show, I feel like. Just the fact that you can, like, somehow move so quickly with, like, little... I mean, like, obviously it requires a lot of physical taxation on your brain, but, like, he doesn't seem to show any, like, physical, like, fatigue from doing it. It's mostly just like, oh my God, my brain's fried.
And I will say the show does you sort of forget that it's as real of a thing as it is, because the game the show does basically say, hey kid, I don't know why you can use this and be fine. Like most people, especially most people who are as like wiry and like frail looking as you, would be done after one. Like, I don't know why you can churn this thing out like you can. Yeah. But because they established that pretty early, you kind of forget that, like, yeah, this is a big deal. David's just built different. And that's actually a term that David uses to describe him. So I was like, yeah, I guess I'm just built different.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say that that's probably one of my biggest issues with the show is just that, like, the technology is cool and all, but like David as a character is definitely just kind of like built up to be like, yeah, he's just better than other people. And there's not really like that great of an explanation for it. Like he just somehow can take more of a mental beating than most other people could. And it's never really like, I don't personally feel like it's ever really like explained that well.
Yeah, and I think so. I'm two things. One, when we say mental beating, it's not just like, man, this kid's resilient. It is. So the concept of cyberpsychosis is that after a certain amount of implants in replacing your body with cybernetics and the wear and tear of that on how your body tries to reconcile that with your mind, tries to reconcile that with like all of that, you go crazy. Like very aggressively, like visual, auditory hallucinations, lack of control over your body, complete blackout periods. Like it runs the gamut. It's almost always violent. And so David's whole thing is that he's just built different. And yeah, they don't really explain it, but I don't think they need to. This is one of those Goku was better before he was a Saiyan type things, where it's like the more that we try to explain it, the more we're getting mired in the mud that is not integral to the story. Because by and large, and I don't know if this is a spoiler, but I'm going to say it anyway, by and large, this is kind of a Tony Montana story. Or like this is kind of a Scarface story. Where it's like it's a rags to riches, nothing to something, to pushing yourself too hard, and then what happens, right? And yeah, it's a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that's largely avoidable. There's an argument to be made about what I just said about whether or not how much of it is avoidable, because for as much as like a lot of David's problems he makes himself, part of it is also Arasaka, one of, if not the largest company in the world, is super interested in the fact that he's just built different. So like even if the events of the story didn't happen, how much shit was he going to get from Arasaka just coming at him, right? Like,
yeah, definitely.
There's that argument.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's less that I feel like it needs to be explained, and more so that I just feel like introducing such like an overpowered piece of technology just like right off the bat and giving it to the main character just feels so like forced. It's just like, yeah, here's just a character that's absurdly powerful.
What I will say is I think that's certainly a way that you can read, especially like towards the end of the show. Like that's certainly a way that you could read it. But I do think the show does a good job, kind of like how my hero, for all of its faults, does do a good job of presenting Deku as a terribly weak person who is then given a ridiculously powerful thing. And I think Edgerunners does a good job of setting up David as that sort of concept, because he's a normal kid who's getting his ass kicked at school because he can't afford the Keanu Reeves I know kung fu brain implant chips to not get bullied.
Oh, is that something that Keanu Reeves has
in The Matrix? Oh, not in the game. In the game, spoiler alerts for the game. In the game,
I guess you're talking about the
Reeves is a cyber ghost that lives in your brainstem.
Okay, I thought he in the game probably had that same kind of implant, but I now know that you're referring to the Matrix.
Yeah. I know kung fu. Right. So like we watch David go from less than nothing to taking this thing that from the get-go everyone in his life is saying this is dangerous, and even if this is fine for you now, this will catch up with you. But David's 17. He's not going to listen to that, let alone being a 17-year-old who's months behind on rent and paying it himself, right? Like he's a 17-year-old with real human problems and a 17-year-old's impulse control. Like,
true.
With the deadly like options available to him in Night City, like it's no surprise that he chooses what he chooses. And what he chooses is to, well, he sort of chooses. He falls in with an edge run, like with a group of edge runners, which is another word for cyberpunks, which is to say, it's people who take crime jobs to pay the bills, right? It's mercenary work.
So the name of this show is actually just Cyberpunk.
Or Edgerunner, depending on how you want to look at it. It's a pen, pineapple, apple pen, however you divide it. He ends up falling in with a crew of Muscle Mom, Muscle Dad, Not Lolly, Violent Ramona Flowers, and Best Girl in a Trench Coat. Oh, and then I guess there's also Fingers Magoo, but nobody likes Fingers Magoo.
And then later down the line, there's Classy Mustache Man, who I can't remember the name of.
Falco. I forget about
Wait, his name's Valco or
Falco.
That ain't Falco.
It is, quite literally. He drives the car. They're a group of edge runners. So a brief aside, you've probably seen Lolly Not a Lolly. Rebecca. I actually had a very long conversation with your partner right before we recorded this about like whether or not she's lolly bait or whether or not she's certifiably a lolly, and the answer is your mileage may vary. I know I've said this on a couple of episodes, and yes, it is kind of a cop-out, but like, she's not aggressively looks like she's 4. She's smaller than everybody, she's more petite than anybody, and she's drawn as like a chibi pseudo-comic relief style, which are all things that sort of imply an immaturity, especially when she like walks in that like straight-legged, straight like arms straight out, like manic pixie dream girl in like a high school anime walking way. But like, it's not as egregious as you would think from the internet. It's still weird. I still don't like how she looks, mostly because she is drawn just differently, and not even like drawn. Like, it isn't like how she's animated, but like her character design is different enough from literally anyone else that she just sort of feels incongruous to me. That being said, I really like, and this is a solid enough time to talk about the visuals of the show. It's a trigger anime, which is good and bad. It's a trigger-ass anime. It's visually interesting. It's gorgeous. It's also a lot and over the top and very stylized. They really use lighting very well, especially in some of the more intense close-ups. But what I really like about this show is by being an anime, it, one, already has the desire to draw characters in weird body proportions. That's just what anime does, right? Like, you look at most anime and you're like, that's a football that you put arms on and that's a person. And it's like, that is a dump truck that you put eyes on and that's a person, right? Like, not to that extent. Sorry. Sometimes I think about what I say.
Well, I mean, when it's One Piece, that's the extent, but
But like, yeah, like it is like people are just weirdly different in anime, but for the most part everybody's like within like the range of like, once you like get a couple of like visual references, like, oh yeah, this is what people look like in this world. But something that the game actually didn't do that much with, by nature of being a game and like a lot of other creative limitations, there's not really that much variance in people in how they choose to make themselves look. And Cyberpunk is a very transhumanistic setting, which is to say, what it means to be a person isn't much. Like, physically, the requirement is not that high. You can reach the point where, like, none of you, practically, like, maybe a sliver of gray matter is you. And the question is, are you a robot at that point, right? Like you have people like Adam Smasher, very big, spooky boogeyman, very important lore figure, shows up in the show because you can't not, who, like, like his street cred is, oh my god, is he man or machine at this point? Who knows? You have everyone up to that, and then like on the street level, you got people who are like, I don't know, my eyes were not as good as they could be. So now I have super duper cameras in my eyes. And by that, I mean my eyeballs are literally cameras that plug into like my brain, right? Like you have all of that range to explore, and the game sort of doesn't. But the show has a lot of fun with it. At least it looks like it. Because, like, you look at Fingers Magoo, Pilar, Pilar, and he's like a weird, lanky, like spider monkey looking man. Like, he's tall, he's lanky, he has a shitty goatee.
He walks around like Sebulba from Star Wars.
Sebulba. He has hands that have 4 knuckles, right? Like you get to play around with like the range of people. And then you look at Maine, Muscle Dad, everybody's favorite character because second favorite because you either like Maine or you like Rebecca, I think is what it boils down to, depending on what corner of the internet you're on. Do you like big badasses or do you like small girls who like to murder?
Or you're obsessed with Lucy because she's just the generic anime girl.
Lucy, I've said it a lot tonight, and I don't know how many times I've said it on microphone, but Lucy is more violent Ramona Flowers. And being who I am, I'm here for it. It's just a shame that she doesn't get to be a character. Right? Like, but like Maine's just like every bit of 9 foot, just, and if he's 9 foot tall, he's 5 foot wide, and he's got muscles, and his hands are bigger than David's torso, and like, he's a big dude. And so you really do get just like a wider range of like physicality in the show, which is just fun. Like one of the main like plot drivers is a fixer, fixers being people who get the jobs for the runners, named Faraday. And Faraday, for whatever reason, has chosen to have 3 eyes stacked vertically on top of each other on one side of his face. He didn't go full 6 eyes, 3 and 3. He has a 3-in-1 split. All right, Faraday, you do you, but why? But why? And like later we meet a character who they're trying to sneak up on, but he's got an eyeball literally in the back of his head. And then later after that, we see that he has like a bajillion eyeballs just all over his head, right? And it's like, yeah, you can do that. Like, there's no reason you can't. Like, if you have the Euro dollars, the eddies, the money, you can do that. And so it's fun to watch that happen. The visual style itself, though, I mentioned in passing, it looks like a Trigger anime.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly got a very high budget, and it definitely shows. Like, visually, it is quite stunning. A lot of really fluid animation. And if you're not aware of like who Trigger is, they did like Kill la Kill, and they were kind of like Proto Trigger was who did Gurren Lagann.
Now, when you say Proto Trigger, you don't mean that was the name.
No, that was the studio that kind of then became Trigger. So a lot of, like, if you see Gurren Lagann and then you see this show, you can see the stylistic similarities. But I mean, yeah, I mean the visuals were like one of its strongest aspects. Like, all in all, like, the more I think about this show, the more like it was fun and entertaining to watch, but I just don't think I'll ever go back to it.
That's fair. Yeah, I don't know. Why do you think that is? Because I don't want to skip to add it to the list or not, but like the characters, right? Like, let's just take a moment to talk about them. Like, the show does a solid enough job establishing everyone's motivation. Okay. The show does an okay job establishing some characters are very well established, or at the very least very well justified and in like the narrative. But like the characters are interesting and they make interesting choices. And honestly, the dynamic between everybody is kind of heartwarming, right? Like, we do kind of get that found family feel in a way. And we do kind of get to see like interpersonal relationships play out, not as much as I would like. This show oh, could you cut that? Because it sounds a little bit like I'm trying to do like a South Park thing. This show suffers from. This show suffers pretty hardcore from being 10 episodes because there's not enough time to build on some concepts and there's not enough time to explore some interactions or some relationships. But at the same time, this show's kind of saved by being only 10 episodes. Because there are just some parts of the plot that's like, wow, this was like a really interesting concept, but I kind of feel like we're milking out the story a little bit. Like I would have liked to see more interacting with the world. I would have liked to see a little bit more side characters. Because just hardcore going into the story, we're kind of jumping around a bit. Time isn't a huge factor, but like time definitely passes, right? So like,
Yeah, I mean that I would agree. The characters I think are done a disservice by it being a shorter anime, but it's like, yeah, there's this fine line where like, sure, it definitely could have used some more episodes for me personally in order to like make me a bit more invested in the characters. Like, I this is like an odd comparison, but before we recorded, we were talking about Over the Garden Wall. And Over the Garden Wall is like an incredibly short story by like this standard, like, but it makes me 10 times more invested in the characters that are present because the story itself is a lot more personal, I think. Like the story for Cyberpunk is so centered around these mega corporations and these people running these jobs and what it means to like exist in this universe. Whereas I feel like it kind of drops the ball on being a very personal story, but it's trying to. Like it literally is trying to be a story about David and Lucy and their relationship, and yet I don't think their relationship gets enough time to shine for it to like actually be a story about that, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does. And so this is actually something that, again, we were talking about off mic, but I don't like the ending. I'm not going to say what it is yet because we're not at spoilers, but I don't like the ending because the ending sort of hard confirms that the story's about the relationship, right? And until that point, the show kind of isn't directionless, but it feels weird because like the relationship's a big part of it. Like a lot of the screen time is spent on the fact that they are in a relationship, but at the same time, a lot of characters' motivations and like what they're doing and how they're interacting is very much dependent on kind of chasing your dreams and being yourself in this setting that crushes people, right? That chews people up and spits them out. And so that's also a very real part of the story. And a lot of it, for the most part, sort of feels like the two threads are pulling at each other. And honestly, for the most part, I feel like the story of like the individual struggle and the individual like achieving something wins out like 90% of the show, and then the ending happens, right? But yeah, I think it's very fair to say that if the point was their relationship, then the relationship needed more time.
That's like the problem is I feel like they had so much to set up, and it's like they kind of tried to fit two different stories into 10 episodes. Yeah. They wanted to fit in this story about a kid surviving in this world, but then they were like, oh, also we should give this kid a love interest. And then the ending is all about that love interest. And you're like, okay, so what was this story really about? Was this story about this kid trying to survive in this world? Or was this a story about this kid falling in love and then that being a tragedy? You know, it just feels very, not like dissonant, but the first half of the story really doesn't feel like the second half. Like, it's just like there's a very clear point at episode 6 where everything changes, and you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess this is just a completely different story now. That's kind of how it feels
And
to me.
very minor spoilers. If you've seen Gurren Lagann, you know what changes. It's the same story beat. But like like that's fair. Like the show jumps radically in tone at the midway, or not midway chronologically, but or like by like screen time, but like yeah, it shifts in tone pretty hard. But I kind of like that. And I was actually thinking as you were talking that maybe there's a third option, right? Like maybe it is the story of this kid surviving, but the reason why we know that story is we're learning about the impact that this kid has, right? Like to the show, like in the show's defense, maybe it's a story about how even if everything gets fucked up and you mess everything up and everything falls apart around you, maybe the fact that you did have an impact on somebody matters. There's that aspect that may be what's at play here.
Yeah, that is a good way of thinking about it. Yeah, I mean, I do like that. Yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot of things that I do like. I think there's so many aspects kind of working against the aspects that I do like that just kind of keep it from being like an all-time favorite of mine, you know.
That's fair. I will definitely say that, like, and don't get me wrong, what I just said, you know, it wasn't playing devil's advocate. It was like, you know, just a different way of thinking about the way that the story shapes out. I do still think, though, that, like, even if that is the point, I do think that is less enjoyable than the story of someone's rise and fall in isolation. I think sort of having that silver lining beat sort of honestly doesn't feel true to the setting, right? Like, it doesn't feel good to the tone of the desperation, is to have like that moment of like humanitarian hope of, but you can make it. Like, man's walking on a beach and there's a million starfish as far as the eye can see, and he's picking them up one by one and throwing them back into the ocean. Some other guy comes up to him and goes like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" Just, I'm putting them back. And he goes, "Well, there are so many of them, you can't possibly make a difference." There's another starfish, made a difference to that one, right? Like having that as like an indirect point at the end, I do kind of think undermines the aggressive cultural brutality of like that ultimate stratification that like is Night City, that is like the separation of people from resources or the ability to make a living for themselves without turning to incredibly drastic measures. Anyway,
It's a depressing universe, that's for sure.
yeah. But on the flip side, and we did kind of breeze over like just some very cool things by just like, yeah, it's visually beautiful and there's some cool imagery. God, there's some really cool things. Like David picks up cash by pushing XBDs, which are brain dances wherein somebody dies. And oftentimes you're either feeling the act of killing somebody or you are the person being killed when you consume it. And that Ripper dog, first of all, when we first meet him, is watching porn. And then he holds out a conversation whilst watching porn and having an autoblower go. Ugh. But immediately after that, one of the coolest visual imagery of anything ever happens, where he's like, "Okay, cool, kid, let's tear out your spine and replace it with this military implant." Dude sits up, lifts up his arms separate at the elbow because they're mechanical, and then like from this conveyor belt in the ceiling, new arms whirl around him in this really badass visual, and then he just slots in new surgery arms and it's like, all right, let's do this. Like, stuff like that happens and it's so interesting.
Yeah. That was the most unenthusiastic response to that. But yes, I agree. It is very there's so many cool visual aspects to it.
Yeah, like there are so many small things. Like, we get to watch Maine punch a dude's head off. And that's not even the coolest thing he'll do.
Yeah, they're a little obsessed with the whole like body explosion things.
Yeah, and like as a genre, there is like a lot there's a lot to be said for like relying on like depictions of incredible violence to like underscore how desensitized people have got and like how separate we are from like the value of an individual human life. It's powerful imagery, but it's not something that we haven't seen before. So the show does kind of use it, and there may be that like artistic aspect of it, but like after a certain point, it's like, wow, Studio Trigger just really wanted to go whole hog and are finally have an IP that let them do something violent. Because oh god, there's a lot of like bullets hitting a face, so like you watch it explode from the inside, and there's like half of a jaw on like a neck. Like there's a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you've seen Kill a Kill. Have you?
I got 20 minutes in and thought to myself, as a hairy gentleman who's overweight, I'm not allowed to watch this anime because people are going to assume things about me.
Yeah. I mean, Kill a Kill is very much in the same vein, though it is not like as unnecessarily violent. It is just like unnecessarily gratuitous on like the sexual side, but like it's trying to be funny about it. So it's like I kind of view Cyberpunk and Kill a Kill as like two sides of this coin. Where Trigger wanted to do something that was just like over sexualized, but like at the same time trying to like make a statement about sexualization in anime, and then doing something that's just like gratuitous in all aspects just because they've never done that before, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. Before I say my point, it's very fun to watch where I laughed because I made both of our lines peak.
Yeah, I know. Jesus.
To that point, the action's really good though.
I mean, it is. That's like some of the best animation.
Like you could argue very few of the points of violence matter. But what you can't argue is that they're not cool action scenes. Like they're visually interesting fights. The fights themselves have like a through line. They're very good. To the point of sexualization, David is 17. David's naked a lot. We don't see his wanger, but like David's naked a lot. We watch him work out in the shower, like up to and including like deep knee bends, and it's like, what is happening here? Oh, it's a training montage. Okay, cool. Why couldn't he be like wearing boxers in the living room, right? And on top, so Lucy also. Okay, so one of the things that happens in Cyberpunk, the setting, is that there's a way of interfacing with what has become of like technology and the web and like data banks and like technology TM, where you basically plug your brain into this big hacking computer and you go into like honestly sort of like this pseudo matrix where like things are like structures made out of code, like, and what it looks like in like the setting versus what it looks like in the show versus like that's whatever. But because of the raw amount of data that your brain is processing, like any other computer, it can overheat. And there are a couple of ways that you can counteract that. One of which are like these specialty suits and these specialty chairs that are like meant to counterbalance and like super cool you. But the cheap way of doing it is to bring an ice bath next to where you plug yourself in to keep your body from overheating. So netrunners it is not uncommon for netrunners to ice bath while they are net running. Lucy is a hacker and a netrunner. Lucy is naked a lot. Like full frontal. I said it before, nakedness and violence are often used to depict like raw humanity. In cyberpunk settings, like people with augments being naked, like, oh, look at the man, look at the machine. That's there's something to that. There's also something a lot more true to God. After a certain point, any excuse to get Lucy naked. It's not as egregious as it could be. I am misrepresenting it there, right? Like she gets waterboarded at one point. She's fully clothed, which is awesome. I'm glad that it wasn't like torture porn. But she's naked a lot. There's an entire conversation where she and Kiwi, another female hacker, are on the phone in the bathtub because they were both net running separately, and they just so happened that the call happened when they're both naked, where we can cut from her nipples over to her nipples. It's like, all right, I guess that's a thing that we're looking at. Yeah, and to the show's credit, it doesn't like hard linger on any particular like, okay, cool, can I go on to the next slide? Did you get that? But like there are like panning shots, it never has to happen, but it's not the worst that it could be, which is the epitome of playing devil's advocate. And honestly, I shouldn't be, because it's egregious.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying off camera, or I mean off mic, we were like, I was saying that the sexualization and just like the gratuitousness of all the the sexual activity is just like kind of meant to show how like in this day and age where like humanity is just kind of like on the brink, like there's either you're living in abject poverty or you're part of these mega corporations. It's like the sexual aspects of life are just like exaggerated because that's like the only way that these people can like find pleasure and joy anymore, and it's just kind of like taken to this next level, and it is gratuitous, and honestly I just think it's unnecessary, but like that's like the only in-world like reason for it.
Yeah, and like the escapism is like a real aspect of what they're like underscoring there, right? But like so there isn't that many acts of sex happening. We only see it in a couple of brain dances, and like total they're like 10 seconds between the two of them. But God, Lucy walks around naked a bunch. And so like that sort of nudity, honestly, I don't like. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think either nudity is pointless, unless it's like actually well done, and it's kind of not in the show. But the casually being naked, on the one hand, I kind of like, yeah, it's your house, do what you're gonna do. But on the other hand, just like, all right, we could be framing you from the shoulders up, and we could just know that you're naked, right? And I think that just like the casually being naked kind of hits harder for me as something that I find annoying, because it screams of like art student, It's like, oh, what is humanity but raw, and what is raw but nude? Also, as long as they're going to be nude, you might as well make them women. Right? Like that's kind of the vibe that it gives off more often than not.
I agree.
God, we're really shitting on the show. I really like the show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like we're necessarily shitting on it. I think we just have a lot of problems with it, and I do think it could have been better. And as far as I understand, that's how most people feel about the video game too.
The coldest and yet somehow most delicious take. It's like gumbo.
But I think we can move on to the second half, unless you have any other major points you want to talk about that are non-spoilery.
There's something we were talking about while we were eating dinner that I wanted to bring up, but I can't remember what it is. Give me 5 seconds. Honestly, mostly because there's no other place to put this. I love how hard the internet is freaking for Rebecca. Rebecca is on screen for less than 6 minutes across all 10 episodes. She is not an important character. She could very easily not be a part of the show. But
I mean, that truly just says something about the internet, right? Because the internet will literally just like latch on. Like, she's not inherently a bad character design. I believe that. And neither is Lucy. Character wise, neither of them are that great. Rebecca, I like way more than Lucy, but also, I guess that is saying a lot that since Rebecca shows up for less than 6 minutes, she's still like a more interesting character than Lucy.
yeah, and I think the problem is so by nature of the show having David and Lucy both being the protagonist, but like David being the main protag, Lucy really just exists to be there, which is unfortunate because she could get so much more and she could be such an interesting character. And like with the backstory that we get for her and like how she acts, she's super interesting, especially in the first couple of episodes. She's super interesting. And then she just sort of David's girlfriend and she's around.
What is she, an Akira Toriyama character?
No, Toriyama. If you're a woman in a Toriyama show, you best disappear like Launch, or you are having like 5 kids. But yeah. God, there was a point I was gonna make before we brought up Toriyama. Yeah. Okay. We never learn how old Lucy is. David's hard confirmed 17. Lucy is definitely an adult. And yes, what adulthood means in the Cyberpunk 2077, it's whatever. I'm watching this in 2022. Lucy definitely had sex with a teenager. And I'll give the show the benefit of the doubt that by the time they're living together, he's 18. But like, come on. And she's not that much older than him, but like, you know, like back in high school, the one person who like brought their 22-year-old boyfriend to the prom, and it's like, you're 22, why are you here? Right? Like, I kind of get that vibe from Lucy. It's like,
Yeah.
don't do it, Lucy. There are some moments of tell, don't show as well that I like, that really stick out to me. Like, one of them is like Lucy tells David pretty early on, you're too good a person for this life. And at that point, we'd never really seen David do anything that good. Like, he wasn't a delinquent. He was a delinquent by like the standards of like a prep school. But like, apart from that, all that we saw David do was some petty crime and then join a net running crew. So Lucy, what part of David makes him too good to become a runner? Right? Like, there are moments like that where we're like, okay, cool. So I guess David's a good guy, right? Where it's like, we don't really see him doing anything altruistic. And like, you'll then go on to watch him kill a bunch of people. And granted, again, with the setting and especially the context of who, like, he's killing gangers, he's shooting up Maelstrom, he's killing scavs, right? Like, cool. They were all almost, without exception, bad people. But that's still a lot of people you're murdering, dude.
Well, and something I remembered that I said off mic was how Lucy and David's relationship reminds me a lot of Boss and Miranjo from Ranking of Kings, because their whole relationship could have been saved if they literally just communicated properly. But it said no. They both have different motivations and they're going for different things. But for some goddamn reason, they just refuse to talk to each other about why they're doing what they're doing. And then it basically just blows up in their face. That's like other than that, their relationships aren't that similar. But it just hardcore reminded me of Boss and Miranjo.
Yeah, there is a big amount of, hey guys, you know, if you talked. And like, that's a thing in all stories. But in this show, again, because the romance it pulls so heavily from the other themes and the other plot points, it's like, guys, come on. And like, the real kick in the crotch is that their goals aren't opposite of each other. Like neither of them are on like a super pressing timetable either. So like, They really could have just been like, okay, cool. Well, let's both double down on doing your thing. And then when that's done, we'll take a day or two and then we're going to go do my thing. Like, they could have just done that. Granted, David's 17, so it's not like he has the emotional maturity to have that conversation. And Lucy's a woman who's running from a lot. So, like.
But also, the show is 10 episodes, so what are you going to do?
But, like, there's also, like. But, like, even then, like. Hard pivot. There are moments where, like, I really do like this show, right? Because, like, David has moments, and, I did just say that David, like, we don't really see David being that great of a guy, but David does have moments where he freezes, right? Because he's like, he flashes back to watching his mom die, or all of these other things, or he just doesn't want to shoot somebody, especially at first. And it's like, we do kind of see David, like, being torn between, like, am I going to really commit to this? And there are moments where it's like, yeah, David, this life is putting you in a bad choice, like a bad position. You don't have a good choice, and I'm sorry. And those moments, they're very powerful the first couple of times you see them. But then they like happen 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. And it's like, David, you got to stop freezing, my man. Like, by the time you've, like, really started chipping up, you've chosen to be a runner. You're not going back to school. Like, there's one scene in particular that we can talk about later, but I'm just like, why is this even a moment that you're having, brother?
Well, Jack, would you add this to your list?
Yes, I would. It's not that big of a time investment, and it is gorgeous. Like, and it is fun. And when it's all said and done, like, the content you consume doesn't have to be more than that. Like, not everything has to have a bigger point, and not everything has to have a bigger meaning. And this show has a point, and this show has meaning. It doesn't, necessarily deliver on concepts particularly amazingly. And, by part of being in this sort of subgenre that's, like, been seeing more and more representation lately, the points that it makes are, a little bit, like, it's not that we haven't seen before, but it delivers it well enough. Like, it's not amazing paragons, but they also don't really drop the ball too terribly on anything. And there are some twists and turns I was like, oh. But honestly, like, you can watch this whole thing on a Sunday. And if you just want to no thoughts, head empty, some cool stuff, this is a good anime for that. If you want to sit down and just, like, you really want to cry today, there are moments where this show will get you there if you're so inclined. I would add it to the list. Forrest,
Hello.
would you add it to your list?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we've kind of been shitting on it a little bit, but I mean, all in all, like, I feel like that's mostly just because, like, I wouldn't say I necessarily had, like, high expectations or anything, but I just know that it's not, like, an all-time favorite, It was still, like, a very quality show, like, very, very quality anime, Like, we've definitely watched stuff that's way worse than it. But yeah, like, totally worth watching if you just want, like, a really good short anime to watch. Yeah, twists and turns, like, definitely, like, 2 or 3 really good, just, like, jaw-dropping twists that definitely blew me away, which definitely makes it worth watching, in my opinion, even just for those, So, yeah, I would definitely add it to the list.
So, for the rest of the conversation, we're going to be just spoilerino. So, a brief overview of just the plot of the show. David's mom, turns out, she could not be doing what she was doing for David and be on the up and up. So she was paying for him to go to Arasaka Academy. Arasaka being one of the mega corporations. It's like one third of what owns everything, right? Arasaka had this, like, academy. This is how you get into Arasaka. You graduate, you have a good chance of getting a corporate job. Corporate jobs are super sick. There's no way she could afford it. So we find out at the end of so David takes the implant that his mom, so David got the implant because his mom had taken it off of the cyber psycho because she's like the body disposal EMT team. And she was going to sell it to Maine. Well, David starts getting pickpocketed by Lucy in a train, and he catches her, uses the implant to like call her out. They spend a day doing fun crime together. At the end, she invites him back to her place. They have like honestly kind of a nice moment. It is again a little weird because it's like, how much older than him are you? You're old enough to buy booze. Which makes me think that you're 21, but like, do people card in Night City? But like, right, like, there's that aspect to it. And then we hard cut to David being like interrogated by the rest of the crew. And at this point, we don't know who they are. All that we know is that Lucy turned on him. Right?
Well, yeah, because he wakes up from their whole like brain dance, and then he gets knocked out by Maine.
And Maine basically goes, "Hey kid, that's my implant. I bought it. I paid for it. It never got to me. So, gimme." And like the crew are kind of talking with him in the room, like, "Well, is it going to be more expensive just to like kill this kid and then take it off of his body, or God, I mean, I guess in paying to get it removed from him is going to be worth more. How's this going to work?" And David like talks his way and like, "Give me a chance. I'll pay you back. Like please, let me be part of the crew." And that's how he gets in with everybody.
Then he also like tells them, because they're also doing this because he was supposed to get it from David's mom, and then he's like, "Oh, my mom died today," and they were like, "Oh shit, okay, well, I guess that's awkward."
Yeah, they're like, "Oh damn, that sucks. She's a good woman." Anyway, what are we going to do to get that implant out of you, kid?
Well, actually, that kind of raises a question. Is it ever brought up in the game or anything like that? Like, can people get implants removed? Like, how does that work? Like, do they then get replaced with bio, or do they just get replaced by, like, a non-implant mechanical arm?
You're probably going to get a non-advanced cyberware. Like, realistically, like, David's replaced his nervous system. His central, like, spinal column has been replaced by this thing. I don't think the Ripper Doc's keeping the spine on ice, you know? So in that case, it'd be like, okay, cool. So now we're paying for, like, an artificial spine, and we're paying for, like, rewiring his nerves into, like, some other cheaper thing. In the game, you just slot him out like another equipment item.
Man, only if it was that easy.
Oh yeah, dude, I'd have gorilla hands today, or gorilla arms. But yeah, and so he does some odd jobs with them. There's some fun moments. We sort of like get like honestly almost like a Need for Speed like style, like family building up. And then one day, Fingers Magoo just sort of dies.
Yeah.
Like
that took me by surprise.
Yeah. There's this homeless guy pissing on their turf, just like a little bit of ways from like the entrance to like their hideout. And most of them are just like, we'll just leave him there. But Fingers Magoo's like, "Hey dude, do you want people pissing on your doorstep? Like, what's going on here?" And he's like giving him shit. And like this guy's just like toned out. He's just not in it. And then, like, Fingers Magoo just keeps yelling, and then, like a flash, the dude's wrist opens up, and he blows his head off. Which then leads to one of my favorite Kiwi lines of, "Ew, I got some of him on me."
Yeah, that was definitely just a very shocking moment. I mean, I didn't even bring this up in the first half, but, like, that's something that I do genuinely appreciate about this show, is that it doesn't pull its punches, and I do enjoy fiction that is not like scared of killing off its cast, you know?
Yeah.
Because like a lot of stuff just isn't willing to go that far, you know?
Yeah, and I do think his death does a very good job of, again, reestablishing that, like, hey, like, because like up until this point, like we've had a couple episodes, like things are looking up. Like David's making cash, the crew's like being successful, they're going places, and this is a moment where a show just goes, bad things still happen, and you're not even good people. So imagine how much bad stuff's going to happen to you, right? And this is like a very cool moment for that. Yeah, and then they just sort of move on. Life is normal.
Yeah, they certainly move on from people's deaths very quickly.
Which,
well, I guess I don't know if they move on. It's just like we don't linger on their feelings about the fact that someone just died.
Which, again, does sort of make sense. Because, like, yeah, people die in this town every day, and we are in a very dangerous profession.
They're just kind of desensitized, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and then they just sort of like go back to doing jobs. David's sort of like, I need to start taking this a little bit more seriously. They get this job to kidnap an Arasaka, like, executive. They figure it out. A lot of cool stuff. They find him. They get him. And they start hacking his, like, neuro implant. Excuse me. They start hacking his neural implant for just, like, data that they need. Well, this is the episode. So we were talking a little bit earlier about how they don't really develop things as much as we would like them to. This is one of those moments. The episode prior to this moment, Maine's hands shake a little. That's it. That's all the buildup you get prior to this episode. Well, in this episode, Maine starts sort of losing it. Like, he gets a little bit hallucinating. He just straight up walks up and jacks Kiwi while she's hacking this guy. It just punches her faceplate off. And it's like, oh.
And doesn't he just like knock her out too? Because don't they have to like take her away?
Oh yeah, because oh yeah. Maine is 20 brawn easily. Like, he is body as hell.
Right before that, Kiwi was like, didn't she like get like a little messed up by like the dude's security system?
A little bit. She was struggling with it. She was just having a hard time.
I was like confused about that whole, like, didn't they call it like ICE or something like that? Yeah, is that like a specific security that like Arasaka like corp people have or something?
No, ICE is just sort of like the type of defensive programming to like safeguard against things. And one of the things that they do is they can up into like overload like the neurological system of whoever's hacking. That's how netrunners die, realistically, is they trip an alarm or they trip some safety mechanism, and then they get fried. So she was having a little bit of trouble with that, but Maine just gets up and starts going in on her. And so Muscle Mom, Dorio, I love her. I love her so much. She's like, hey, buddy, calm down. Hey, David, get in here. Get Kiwi out of here. I'm going to calm Maine down. And like Maine and David sort of have like a good moment here in the hallway where David's like, hey, man, what's going on? I heard a little bit about the thing. And Maine, who at this point still in a bad way, is just going, you think you're better than me, kid? You think? You? And so like they're sort of like that, but like up until this point, like they've sort of established like definitely like a mentorship vibe between the two of them, and we definitely have had some very nice moments. Like there are some very fun, very genuinely sweet moments of like them bonding. And David's mom was a single mom, so like there's like a little bit of like the father-son dynamic there too.
I feel like I completely forgot that, like, wasn't this the second episode that was like basically just 100% like a montage, and it was just like it was like Maine and David like chatting and then just kind of like jumping through all these like different like missions that they were doing. Yeah,
the second episode is like a training montage as David's like learning the ropes, getting a little bit more serious into it, and like the montage is presented against the backdrop of David and Maine chatting and like taken their immunosuppressants together.
I guess I just remember that episode feeling so, like, not out of place, but just like so weirdly paced in the grand scheme of things. Because I felt like that was their attempt to just like get us like to a point where we gave a shit about them, like as a group, together, leading up to like what we were just talking about, where like Maine starts to kind of go crazy.
I think that's certainly part of it. But honestly, I think they do it pretty well. Like, I think the moments that we see, like, we still see enough of like the new, like the outsider new guy dynamic in this montage that, by the end of the montage, like it isn't like they're falling over each other, but it's like, all right, he's part of the crew. And I honestly do like how it all sort of happens in one episode because A, there's not that much time to build on it, and B, we don't need to build on it.
Right. Oh yeah, me too. I mean, I liked it. It was just, I remember watching that episode and just being like, oh, okay, that was a lot.
Yeah, it's a little fast, but I think that's the speed that it should have been. That episode I actually like quite a bit. But yeah, so Maine sort of blows him off, and then Dorio's like, hey, dude, when, like, you gotta slow down. And Maine's like, no one's telling me what my limits are. Like, I've gone this far, and Maine needs to accomplish something. He needs to prove something or do something. Like, Maine has a goal. We never learn what that is. Because as this episode progresses, Maine goes cyber psycho. Full on.
Which is so funny considering he wanted that Sandavestin from that David put in. I feel like if he had actually gotten that, he would have like gone cyber psycho 10 times sooner.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. That's the like slow down speed like implant that David has. Yeah, 1,000%. There's no way Choom could have handled it. Yeah, so he goes cyber psycho in this episode. We get a little bit of exposition, but what's very great about this episode, like this is one of the moments where this show visually shines, is we go back and forth between the world that Maine is seeing and the world around him. And like he's violent and disassociated and lurching, and there's this very beautiful moment where David's like, I gotta go help him. I gotta go save him. We can get him out of this. Maine's gone. Like, not 100%, but Maine's like 98% gone at that point. And so by the time David gets at him, he shoots at David. He misses. And then I was like, oh, hey, David. What's up, man? Hey. And so like there's a sort of like moment of clarity thing where it's like, hey man, this sort of went south, huh? And David's like, all right, you and I, we're gonna fight. Like, we're not losing anyone else today. We're getting you out of it. Like we can get out of this. We can make this okay. And his hand starts shaking as he goes to like steady himself. Like, we're gonna fight our way out of this. And like Maine just sort of puts a big reassuring hand on his shaking gun. Just like, you can't do this, kid. But Maine had been setting up this funeral pyre for Dorio because she took a bullet in like this shootout.
Well, didn't he kill her?
No.
Wait, really? I thought that like
Yes.
I thought he was in a cyber psycho phase and he just straight up shot her in the head. That's what I thought happened.
So he's going cyber psycho, and she's like, oh God, I need to give him the meds to calm him down so that he can snap back to it because this isn't safe. And so the only way that like she can get to him is she's like, she gets there, she jabs him, and as he's turning back to reality, because she's in like jabbing him, she's in between him and the guy shooting at him. So the guy shooting at him just get her. And so that's when he's like, okay, cool. We are done.
I definitely misread that whole situation. I
was a little confused at first too, but
I straight up thought that he just shot her in the head.
I rewatched this episode. By that I mean I watched the second half of this episode twice, once in English, just because like I didn't want to go back because I'm like, I want to make sure I'm seeing this right, and I'm like, well, I also want to see how the English dub is. But yeah, the cops, the Max Tack, the the trauma team who shot her. And so that was like sort of like, well, cyber psycho or not, I don't want to. We're done here. There's a very cool moment where while he's cyber psychoed, he's like, oh, is this my fault? Did I fuck up? And like he's about to shoot one of the guys, and he's like, hey, did I mess up? And the guy goes, what? And just domes him. My favorite piece of violence here is Maine is trying to get the Arasaka exec out of the building up until the point that Dorio dies. And because then at that point, he's like, okay, cool. Nothing matters. We're done. I'm taking people out with me. And so he has the guy who's tied to a chair tied to himself. He runs out of bullets after he's like, okay, cool. We're going for blood. So he takes the guy, chair and all, off of his chest and tears through like 4 people with this dude. And it's like,
yeah, I mean that whole man's body just got to get obliterated.
Yeah, it's very gory. It's one of those like gross, dude, type of moments. But yeah, it's a very good moment and it's a very good episode, and that's like that's our Kamina died moment. Spoilers alerts for Gurren Lagann, by the way. That's our Kamina dies moment. Now Simone has to grow up and take charge. And grow up and take charge he does. Because at the end of that episode ends with Lucy driving the van away with David in the back seat holding on to Maine's dismembered gorilla arms, which are these like replace your arms with like these hydraulic punch mittens type tech. Although, unlike in the game where that's the same equipment slot as implanted cannons in your forearm, these guys get to have both. And that's not fair. That's cheating. They also shoot big old shells. But yeah, so the episode, so earlier, after Pillar, Pilar, Fingers Magoo dies, Maine sort of offers David his hands, and David's like, nah, I think I'm just going to stick with what I have. Like, I'm going to keep it light. And Maine's like, nah, man, there's no need for that. It's not like he's going to use them. And David's like, nah, I mean, they're like techie hands anyway. They're not going to be great for me. And it's like, all right, I mean, your organic hands aren't going to cut it any. So what do you have your eyes on? And then like they sort of joke about Maine giving David his hands once Maine dies. Well, Maine's dead. David has his hands, and we're driving away. And for the first time in the show, the episode ends in silence. It's just them driving away. I mean, not silence, but the only thing that we hear is the engine of the van. Very powerful moment.
And also, I mean, I was also going to say in this episode, Lucy, this is kind of the instigating factor for the way Lucy acts for the rest of the series, because she learns something about David and Arasaka during her like jump into the Arasaka guy's head, you know?
Yeah.
And then let miscommunication commence.
Yeah, and then so that's how episode 6 ends. Episode 7 opens who knows how much time later. David, who was sort of wiry, is jacked now, and very obviously much more chromed out. Very like much more implants. Who knows how much of his body is his original body anymore? And it just opens on a gig. And it's just sort of like a look at them now. And David, lo and behold, has Maine's arms implanted. They're much smaller. I don't know if that's like, if they had to like refit them to get them on David's hands, or if it was like a don't question it sort of thing.
I mean, that's what I thought. I was like, oh, can you just like resize these implants?
And like David sort of stepped into like leading the crew. He's running a job with Becca. Turns out by this point, Lucy stopped doing jobs with the team. They go back and forth. They do some just like where are they now sort of moments. Lucy and David are living together. They just sort of like start talking. They drive out to the wasteland, stare at the stars.
Well, the thing that I found odd about Lucy and David living together was that he definitely didn't let anyone else know that. Like, it felt like everyone else was under the impression that Lucy just peaced out. Because there was conversations specifically about David wanting her to come back, but then they were not in the know that he was just straight up living with her.
I don't know if David... No, because I think it's... You're right you are right to be confused. Not like I get to tell you that you can't be confused.
Well, but there was like a whole scene with Kiwi where her and Lucy were talking about it, and Kiwi talked as though she didn't know that they were living together.
I feel like nobody cares that they're living together more than they don't know, and it's more like so they do constantly say like, you know, when is she coming back, getting her back, all of that stuff, but it does feel like it's only ever in the context of joining the crew, of like getting back into the crew. That's how I read it. I kind of read like the other thing of like people don't care, because there is that moment where like Becca like pseudo jokingly, pseudo not like hits on David, and Kiwi goes, you're coming on too strong, and she's like, what do you mean? Well, rather than being like hot and loud, try being cold and like nerdy. And then it cuts to Lucy in an ice bath. Right.
Oh,
and so like,
yeah.
I feel like they knew that like they were boning down and living together, but they're just like, yeah, when's she getting back into the field? When she coming back to the Need for Speed family?
Yeah, no, I get it.
But either way, it doesn't necessarily. Yeah. We get Lucy's backstory. She was scouted by Arasaka as a street urchin, raised to be like an expendable, like old net hacker. Lore. The show does a good job explaining this, so I'm not going to waste our time now with it.
The store.
The store. Episode 8 happens. They need to stop being horny. The actual note that I have here, so episode 8 is like the second episode where like David and we see David and Lucy just sort of standing around their apartment naked. My note here is lots of cyberpunk things use nakedness as human machine imagery. I think this is just horny. David offs a civilian. David at this point...
Was that the beginning of this episode?
Yeah.
No.
David at this point's kind of going a little... like, he's not cyber psycho, but like...
But he's like as chromed out as Maine was. Yeah. So I think
he's more...
You can tell that like they're getting there. He's getting there. He's kind of going a little crazy.
His version of
he also has...
are starting to shake.
He also has trauma because he watched his mom die right in front of him.
Yeah. And he does like still genuinely like we flash back a lot in moments of like extreme decision making for him of like his first couple of kills, those first moments that he froze up, his decision points to get to where he is. We watch those too, and so it's like, yeah. The show does a very cool set of imagery for cyber psychosis, where like there's sort of like eyes will like jitter and like duplicate and like flash out of sockets, or like heads will like it's very cool how they do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a glitchiness, but it's also like, has it ever been depicted that way? Like, has there been other like cyberpunk like imagery?
Not very visual. Like there hasn't really been other cyberpunk the setting visual imagery. There's like the pictures in the source books, and then there's the game, and then there's this. As far as the game, like the menus from the games are represented when they pull up the GPS. It's the game map. The waypoints are the same. The like telephones, like in the way that they pop up, that's all the same. In fact, when I first heard the phone ringing, I'm like, oh, it's my wife, because that's the only time my phone rang. in the game.
Yeah, I think the cyber psycho thing was a really cool visual idea, but like it definitely is a very like, oh, this can really only be an anime depiction
Yeah.
of this, because it's like, I mean, even if they're glitching out, I don't understand why their eyes would visually look like they're jittering out of their skull to a person outside of their body.
And so they don't mention it in the show, but most people don't have organic eyes. And so like they do kind of take advantage of like staticky camera glitches as like visual motifs, cuz that was kind of established in the game. But also like most people have like optics, like implants. And so I think that's like what those are, is like what you're picking up, like freaking out. Either way, very cool. There's a very cool moment later. Like I said earlier, we run into Adam Smasher because of course we do. There's a very cool moment where like we get to watch Lucy net hack or excuse me, quick hack a bunch of times, where you just like Wi-Fi hack into somebody else's implants or their gun or whatever. And like the screen that she's using to hack is the one that you use in the game, and like it's that like there's a lot of super cool things. But when she goes to hack Smasher, there's like this really cool X-ray vision effect where his skull is, or should be. There's like this like white monster, big toothy skull, and he like physically rips like the program out of the air from around his head, and it's like, all right, now that's some anime shit, but that's cool.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, in this episode, Becca does something that really sticks out like a sore thumb. I don't remember what it is. But like just like visually, it's like, you're so incongruous. Episode 9, so by this point we've established that their fixer Faraday is just sort of not on sides. He's working for Militech, and then that goes sour, so now he's flipping to Arasaka, and part of his transition to Sokka is he's setting up the team to just do stuff that Sokka wants them to do. It's sort of the major crux of like the last half of the show. There's some violence. There's some gigs gone wrong. Long and the short of it, Lucy and David start having a falling out because they refuse to communicate. David's pretty close to cyberpsychosis, and he kind of knows that already. But by this point, he doesn't know where Lucy is, because the day that they have their big fight, Lucy then goes on a revenge killing that turns out to be a trap. So now she's a chip for Faraday to sort of like, hey, Arasaka, cherry on top, you know this net runner that you've been looking for? Well, take a look at this, right? That sort of moment. So she's gone, but the last thing David remembers is a fight. So he's just like, well, guess I'm just going to keep on doing my stuff. And that stuff is getting closer and closer to cyberpsychosis, because up till this point, it's like, yeah, I'm built different. Like, I can go harder. And we do at this point sort of have a weird thing where he's like, I have dreams of, like, I have other people's dreams that I need to fulfill. Like, my mom had dreams for me. Maine had dreams for me. And the mom, yes, she did. But Maine, what? Like, Maine was just like, yeah, kid, you're part of my crew and you're good at what you do.
Well, I mean, he basically says that his motivations are he wants to give Lucy a chance to just live out her life.
At the end, he says that, but like before that conversation that they have,
Oh, okay.
he's like,
I thought
yeah,
that was
I
like
have
in
to
their
go,
fight.
like live up this, like I have to go live up to the dreams that Maine had, and it's like, no, you don't, dude. But like, yeah, so nothing really plot relevant happens moving forward. Kiwi betrays the trip. She's been working with, or the crew. Kiwi betrays the crew. She's been working with Faraday most of this time. Big ol' fight between super chromed out David and Adam Smasher. David rescues Lucy, and they definitely do that moment like in Gurren Lagann where Simone is holding Naya, Space Girl, who exists just to be a MacGuffin, where he's like holding her in Gurren, and like they're like having a moment. There's this, except David is the robot.
Well, we kind of forgot to touch on the cyber skeleton.
The cyber skeleton's just this big military hardware MacGuffin. It's honestly, the cyber skeleton makes the last part of this anime worse because it is not established. It's not visually interesting. It's powerful and at least does some very cool violence, but it's not visually interesting. And the fact that it comes kind of out of nowhere is just like, wow, Dad.
Well, yeah, I mean, it turns out
cyber skeletons at home.
Yeah, it turns out that like that was the last job that Faraday sent them on, and then it was all a ruse because Arasaka wanted David to go into the cyber skeleton because he was a possible test subject for.
Pilot the cyber skeleton, Shinji.
And then so he does because Faraday basically tricks him into it, and then he's basically just. He's basically just screwed after that because now that he's part of this thing, he's basically just consistently going cyber psycho until the end.
Very, very cool fights towards the end. Not too terribly much happens. He has a heart-to-heart with Lucy at the end, and Lucy was like, David's like, hey, yeah, I guess I messed up, but like, I'm just around so that you can live out your dream. And then Lucy just goes, well, what I wanted was for you to be alive. And he's like, yeah, but I can't be alive while I watch all of it. Like, he has like some like generic hero nonsense there that kind of doesn't make sense.
No, I mean his death, yeah, I don't know.
I like his death as a part of like, this kid went hard for no real reason, which is a very cyberpunk story, especially if the story centers around cyberpsychosis. And then, yeah, cool fight with Adam Smasher. There's a very cool visual where Smasher, like, tears David apart bit by bit. And then at the end, he's like, we could make you a robot. And he's like, yeah, fuck off. And so Smasher just goes, okay, and shoots him in the head, which presumably is the last organic part of him.
But the end of the opening shows David with a hole in his.
It does. The opening's very good, by the way. We didn't touch on it. Opening's gorgeous.
And it's actually by Fits and the Tantrums, which was kind of crazy. It's not a Japanese band.
It's by Franz Ferdinand.
Oh, Franz Ferdinand. Yeah, whatever. Two bands that I don't listen to.
Never change, my friend. And then Lucy gets out of there because David, when he saved Falco and Becca, who gets murked. By the way, everybody's favorite murder girl gets fucking murked.
Because she doesn't move out of the way.
She could have just... Adam Smasher is falling, and rather than just going, oh, I don't want to be landed on by that, she stands there and shoots at him, and it's like, girl, shimmy, press the E key.
That was probably the only death that I felt like was just utterly pointless. I was like, she was like kind of built up to be a decent character. It's like, why kill her of all people? Like, she didn't need to die. It was just it just kind of felt. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the show had already enough main characters had died at that point that it was like, we can establish, like, some people can get out. I don't mind that she dies because I do kind of like just like, yeah, cyber running, like cyberpunkin' edge running. It is not a safe profession. I do kind of like that part. But yeah. In the ending, Lucy goes to the moon. The moon, Maggie.
Which was kind of established in like the first episode that was her dream.
Yeah.
Because that was how they wanted to end the show, I guess.
And like, there's a lot of like moon imagery, and it's like it's set up very well. And like the transition to her going to the moon is very beautiful because it's David basically telling Smasher to go to hell. Smasher shoots him. Blood erupts in a circle, and then that circle turns yellow, turns into the lights of the city center that they're in, pans out to the view of the world, pans out to the view of the world from the moon from the brain dance from the second episode. Very beautiful. And then that changes because a little shuttle's pulling in, and then we cut to Lucy on the shuttle. So when Lucy mentioned that she wanted to go to the moon, I had just assumed that she wanted to live there because there are people who live on the moon. Like, Arasaka has, like, a colony in space. And so I just sort of assumed that that's what she meant. But it turns out she's cool just visiting because, like, she's expressly there as part of, like, a tourist thing. And that's kind of a lame ending. But, like, so the ending proper that I mentioned that I didn't like. Lucy's there, but she's not happy. And then she like breaks off. She's still not that happy, and she's sort of like basking in the sun in the way that like she and David did in episode 2, and things still aren't really that good. And then like for a moment she thinks she sees David, and she like remembers when David was in the brain dance and just gushing over how special this is. And then he disappears because he is just a memory. And then she smiles, and we sort of see her turn to embrace the sunlight. And what I don't like about that, again, is that it sort of solidifies that, yeah, the romance is what matters. And again, maybe it's because of how the romance, you know, how even in such a situation you can have a huge impact, even if it is just on one person. Like, I don't know. I don't like it. It's visually interesting, but
I guess I just feel kind of indifferent towards it.
I don't like it because I don't think it's a strong ending. It's a good show, though.
Yeah, all those negative things we had to say about it was good.
Don't get me wrong. This isn't like... Is there a show that we really tore into that we're going to release? Because I don't ever want us to release the Psychopaths episode.
I mean, no, I don't think. I mean, Angel Beats. I feel like I don't know, we might have torn. We didn't really like tear into it, but we didn't necessarily like it.
Yeah, we were pretty critical of Angel Beats.
Yeah. I mean, I think that us being critical of this is just that much more exemplary of like we thought it was quality. Like I think like nothing's perfect, so it's like. There's so many interesting conversations you can have about the show, and I think that makes it stronger for that reason, that there are so many things you can discuss, so many aspects of it that are worth talking about, you know? Yeah. Whereas like with a show like Angel Beats, there's like hardly anything that worth talking about.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because yeah, we were definitely like going into Angel Beats because like this isn't good. Whereas this show, it's like, God, this is such a good show, but here are the things that that
could have been done a little bit better, you know?
It's like, I need this show to be perfect, and here's what's stopping it from being perfect, because everything else is great. If we didn't expressly bring it up, assume it's awesome. Yeah, it's a little unfortunate. I like the show a lot. I don't know if it like is deserving of all of the hype that it's getting. Just because like I'm already like seeing people say that like, yeah, this is the best anime of 2022, and I don't know if that's just because it's on Netflix, so more people are watching it, or if maybe 2022 was just a bad year for anime. I'd be lying if I said I kept up on this year's releases, but like,
I mean, honestly, Chainsaw Man is coming up, and I think Chainsaw Man is going to be one of the best anime of 2022. That's just me.
Talk about gratuitous murder, my God.
But I think that it being on Netflix, I think it just having a wider audience, because I'm sure it's reaching more than just anime fans, you know. Yeah. I think that's a large part of why it's so big right now.
Yeah, the brand recognition is strong, to be sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I've got to say about it.
Yeah, good show. Watch it. It's worth it. It's not that much of your life. Forrest, I don't use social media. I'm bad at it. But you have things.
I mean, I'm still bad at social media. But yes, I make music. You will probably have heard it as the opening of this podcast. But also, you can find me on Bandcamp and Spotify and YouTube at Bustello, Bustello. My other project for my more dancey music is Prism Ship, PRISM SHIP. Yeah, check it out. And thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
One more thing.
Yeah, I literally just said that I was upset that since I didn't say this on mic, I'm going to sound like an asshole. Just because the show isn't what I wanted it to be doesn't mean that it's not good. Like, I wanted it to be a little bit more character driven and a little bit more developmental and a little bit more into like all of the dialogue and really solidify like the individual's journey. And just because that's not what the show decided to go for doesn't mean that it did what it was going to do poorly.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Goodbye.